We've been telling stories, and part of the point of this is that I think we've heard enough sermons, and I wanted to just sort of explore the idea of what if we just told stories and had them sort of speak to us, and the Bible is like 98% story. And sometimes I think we miss that when we start to dissect things and we start to dig into, okay, what does this word mean here, and why did he say it like this? Well, it's a story, and somebody's recounting it like a story, and it was so compelling that somebody felt the need to passionately share this story. And for some reason, we read it like a textbook, that we're having to break down words and stories, and we miss the passion and the enthusiasm and the encouragement and all of those sort of nuances and what happens when you tell a story. And so we've been telling stories and just sort of letting them sit. And this morning I want to tell a story about, I want to tell 3 stories about 3 different women, and just let that sort of sit. So we'll begin in Persia. If you're digging through your Bible, you'll find this story about this woman sort of tucked away in the middle. And what's happened is, and where they're at is Israel and Judah have been removed from their kingdom. They've been overthrown. They are in a time of struggle and strife and discouragement, and everything is difficult just to survive and to continue to worship, because their entire lives have been turned over. If you've been at all with us during the Flow series on Thursday nights, that sort of starts from this place of exile, saying, here is this moment, and God calls these people to continue living their life, which is a weird thing to say, but in the midst of exiles, calls the people, look, go out, get married, enjoy yourselves, go to work, build homes, go live your life, be a part of this community in exile, in the place that you don't belong. Just go live your life. So that's the sort of headspace that we're in when we get to this story about this woman. And all they can do is just be encouraged to go out and live their life, because everything has been turned upside down. And so we get to this moment, and we get this weird story, and this is great for this setting because it is in fact a story itself, and it feels a little out of place actually when you read it. It kind of feels like it belongs in a short story in a high school course or something like that. But we have this king who calls on his queen to come and dance for his royal party. And so you don't say no to the king. It's the king, right? You don't say no. And so the king has called on this woman, and he has all of his guests, all the top politicians, all the wealthiest of wealthiest. Everyone is here at this party, and he has called on the queen, says, come out and dance. Now, she's thinking he's drunk and he's out of his mind, because this is way out of bounds culturally. You don't do this to someone you love. You don't put on display your queen like this. And yet he has. And she says no. That's the story. She says no. And what's amazing about this is the response, because just as you would expect, the king's court is furious. The king is furious, and instead of simply being upset, they say, well, listen, you got to be careful here, because she didn't just do this to the king and this small guest of parties. And this is literally the comment. What if word gets out that she said no? Every woman and wife in the land is now going to have the agency to tell her husband no, or whatever the situation is? What if she says, what if word gets out? I love that line. What if word gets out? So we tell this story about this stubborn woman that wouldn't allow herself to be in this situation at the cost of probably her life, at the cost of losing everything that she has, her situation, her place, her power, her livelihood is built in this moment when she says to him, I don't think so. That's not going to. And so what's great about this story is that we continue into the next story. Because when she is removed from her top queen or top place next to the king, there's space for another woman to come to that, to be the queen. And that woman is Esther. Familiar with Esther? So Esther is Jewish, and in this land at this time, we're in exile. Everything is turned upside down. She really doesn't belong in this space in this situation. And here's what's great, is that as this story unfolds, what we learn is that this guy Haman gets put in a high place, and the king calls on the land to bow down to Haman. Sounds like kind of weird and like rudimentary. Just bow down to this guy. But give honor to this guy. And there's a Jew named Mordecai that's part of the inner court, and he's sort of around. And he says, no. He says, I'm not going to do that. And Haman gets furious. Haman is so enraged that it's not just Mordecai that he's going to go after. This sort of has a sort of American politics kind of ring to it. It's not just Mordecai that I'm going to go after. All Jews are now going to be stressed when Haman has his way. And so he goes to the king and he says, let me tell you about these people. They came from this other place. They live by different rules. And there's this one town where they even live and they don't even listen to the king's laws. They live under their own law. They do their own thing. Everything that happens is built around their own world. And they don't worship the king. They don't bow down when asked to. They don't do anything. These are bad people. And the king listens to him. And he puts a little icing on the cake. He says, listen, if you let me go after these terrible people, so really I'm doing you a favor, I'm also going to put 10,000 pieces of gold in the king's court, the king's hand. So I'm going to pay you if you let me send out this nice edict. And it works. And the king says yes. And so on top of being in a land that is not theirs, on top of having their temple destroyed, their place of worship and life and living taken from them and moved into under new laws and new rulers, now they are literally about to lose their lives. And not just one, because he refused to do this, but all of them. And Haman has set a date, and he set a time to go and kill all of these people. This is where Esther comes back to play. So Esther is now the king's right-hand gal. I don't know. And Esther sends word to Mordecai. Mordecai sends word back, and he says, listen, you've got to do something. And Esther says, now wait a second. You saw what happened to the last girl, right? She's gone. You don't know. You saw what happened to her. If I even approach the king's court without being called, the law is I will be put to death. I don't know. I don't know if that's the right thing to do. I haven't even been called into the king's court for 30 days. And so Mordecai presses her a little bit, and this is where Esther takes over. And this is the beautiful strength of Esther that sometimes gets passed over because Mordecai has played this role. But Esther steps in and she says, listen, okay, go and tell all the people to pray and to fast for 3 days. And I and the women with me are going to do the same. And then I'm going to go see the king, and maybe I will die. So they pray, they fast, and Esther walks in to see the king. And he raises his staff to symbolize, essentially, she gets a pass. So she will not be killed. On top of that, she gets to plead her case for the Jewish people. She gets to explain what Haman is doing, and she gets to explain and stand up for her people. Put her life on the line to do this. Leaders come from all different places. And in this story, we have two women back to back. One of them pays a huge price because she said no, because she said my life is more valuable than that, because you don't get to treat people or me that way. And the other one is lifted up, is exalted, survives, and saves her people from utter destruction. Literally genocide. She saves her people from genocide. You see, in these stories that just pop up here and there, we get glimpses of people in their strength. We get glimpses of people in their brokenness. We get glimpses, and we miss all that when we try to dissect everything. And this story has such power. Again, it is there's an assumption that God is working in the background, but it's just the story, and you read that into it. I wanted to tell just a couple more stories about this. One is about a single mother. Husband leaves a child, 2 years old. She's never worked. She doesn't know how or what she's going to do. Sells the home, moves into a small apartment, and just begins pressing on with life. Esther's in this big role. This woman is in what looks like a small role, right? But leaders are put in different places in different times. And so with really no options, she begins finding work. She begins providing. She begins finding education for her child. She begins growing. And as time goes on, she leads in that family to do something great. Out of something very small, God asks her to lead in that situation. So we have a story about stubbornness. We have a story about strength and courage. And then this last story is really about resiliency. It's about leading in the midst of trauma and struggle. And I want to tell one more story. A few years ago, we had a Halloween event. Big carnival, games everywhere. And about half hour before we were closing doors, a van pulls up, and the woman leans out the window and she says, "Hey, we're all dressed as witches. Can we still come in?" And I was like, "Well, sure, of Yeah, of course. Come, like it's a community. It's everyone, right? Come on in. And so they come in. They enjoy the carnival and games and they're back the next week on Sunday. And this story is about Angel, by the way. and Angel comes in. She's in a wheelchair. For those of you that aren't aware, Angel has MS and has been struggling with that, fighting that since a little bit before she showed up here. For a year, I think, we only knew Angel in a wheelchair. And so she showed up that night in the witch costume. I'm not sure I can be here. And then she came back the next week, and then she came back the next week, and then Greg came and others, and we've watched this story grow. And one day, I was working in the back over here. We were doing some trimming on the trees or something, and Angel walked up and said, "Hey, how's it going?" Angel walked up and said, "Hey, how's it going?" "Hey, where's your wheelchair?" I decided I didn't need it. Out of sheer will, I promise you, Angel decided after another scary hospital visit that she was going to walk, and fought it and showed up that day, walked into the backyard and said, "Hey, Bradley, how's it going?" Resiliency. And she continues to fight, and she continues to fight. And what we see in these stories, that no matter where you're at, and no matter where you've been or what you're doing or what situation you're in, God puts you in a place to lead in all different ways. So you may be the Queen of Persia, called to save your people, but you may also be a single mom called to lead your child and your family into something great. Or you may be in a really crappy battle with MS and called to show people what it looks like to follow God and to lead. Sorry. Sorry, this is unplanned. So how are you called to lead? That's what it comes down to. How are you called to lead?